So John, thank you so much for inviting us to come and hear about your story and the Coinbase story. We're very excited to be here. This is the Columbia Blockchain, AI, and Web3 class, and technologies that are transforming Industry 5.0. And of course, you have been at the forefront of transformations before the digital currencies.
Yeah, 2.0, 3.0,
yeah.
4.0.
And of course, Coinbase is the leader in its class in the Industry 5.0. So why don't we start off by having you tell us a little bit about your background, because you did transform another financial market beforehand. So this is your second wave in the transformation world.
Yeah, great. So, so thank you so much for having me. This is awesome. Thanks so much for coming. I hope you guys enjoy today. So I didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. So when you don't know what to do with your life, you go get an MBA. Uh-huh. So I did a JD MBA. Exactly, right? So I did a JD MBA. Did strategy consulting. Again, didn't know what to do with my life. So strategy consulting was wonderful. Lots of different projects, lots of different industries. And then, honestly, I wish I could say, I get asked this all the time, I wish I could say I had a plan for my career path. I really didn't. I ran into a gentleman who was the chairman of the New York Mercantile Exchange, which at the time was the largest commodity derivatives exchange in the world. So the value of a barrel of crude oil, when you read a barrel of crude oil is $120 a barrel or $60 a barrel, that price emanated from a building on lower downtown Manhattan called NYMEX, New York Mercantile Exchange. And back then it was this private organization. It wasn't public. It was one of the most important companies in the world, but it was a sleepy little building on the corner that nobody really paid attention to. And I had won a fellowship. This organization had paid for me to go to Harvard Business School, and I was thanking them. And I was like, thank you so much for paying for me to go to Harvard Business School. And the chairman of the NYMEX happened to be at that meeting and literally just grabbed me and when I walked off stage and said, what are you doing with your life? And I said, I'm going to go work for, probably shouldn't say which one, Investment Bank X. Uh-huh. And he said, no, you don't. You work for me. Uh-huh. You start Monday. And I had a weekend to make a really tough decision. I had, my mother worked 3 jobs. My father worked 3 jobs. I was the first person in my family to go to college, much less a place like HBS. I had this golden ticket to work for this prestigious investment bank. I was seeing everything that my parents worked for kind of come to fruition in a way, or at least I perceive that. There's no guarantees in life. And, I was really torn over the weekend, but I decided deep down, they always joke about you flip a coin to make a hard decision. Uh-huh. And it's not the coin flip that determines it, it's if you're disappointed in the coin flip, right? You've all heard that, right? That's yes. A good way to think about it. You've heard that? And so I kind of did that internally. I'm like, what kind of life do I want to lead? And I decided I had this thesis early on, and it's that my LinkedIn profile, I think whoever dies with the best stories wins. Oh, that's a good one. That's my kind of little life philosophy. I think I'll make better stories working for this guy. Uh-huh. And so I took a job as his sort of, I did everything from help him purchase a sports team, a major sport, he was a billionaire, to get his laundry. I did everything, and I gradually moved more and more into the New York Mercantile Exchange role because he had plans to demutualize and go public, and back then there was a way of trading that dominated capital markets called open outcry, which was literally 868 or so. Unfortunately back then, mostly men who were just screaming and yelling and making crazy hand signals and pricing the world's most valuable commodity, crude oil. And this isn't like 1960, this is like 2002. So it was archaic even at that time. It was just ridiculous that system still existed. And my first job was to start to dismantle that system and move it to electronic trading. And I was told, look, they're gonna hate this. They're gonna hate this. One, because you're killing their life, you're killing their way of life. 2, and this is the part I think we get into kind of transformation issues, it worked. It worked unbelievably well. There were extraordinarily few trade breaks. We traded $1 trillion of notional crude oil every day, thousands and tens of thousands of transactions. And again, I have to say how wacky it was that it worked. There were pits. There were like 11 or 12 pits. So imagine a massive trading floor. And there were physical pits that went into the ground with steps, and hundreds of traders would gather around the pit, and they would create a market. And they'd scream and yell and do hand signals, and you would say, "I'll sell crude oil at $60 a barrel," and you'll say, "I'll sell it at 59," and I would be the buyer, and I'd have to hit your bid, your offer, because it was lower than his. And there were all these rules, and there was a kid, a kid in the middle of the pit, and he had like a tutu, but up, and it was a net. And he had a hockey mask on and pads. And the traders would write their trades down on these pick cards. There were these heavy stock paper. And then when they filled the pick card, they would tear it off and they would fling it. And these guys could do this. It would go like, it was amazing. They were savants. And it would hit the kid in the face, fall into the net. And then every 6 or 8 minutes or so, he'd gather them all up, hand them to a runner. Again, 2002. This is not like the 1810. And they would run it to a room, and there were data processors, and they put the trades in. And that's crazy, but it worked really, really well, extraordinarily well. The world's most valuable commodity was traded by kids in hockey masks and runners and data processors in the aughts. And when you have such a mission critical system like the price of crude oil, there is bad reasons why they don't want to modernize. There was corruption. There was, the board members also made their living off the floor, but there were also very valuable reasons, right? That has to be a 99.9999% uptime. That process has weathered the test of time. It went through 9/11. We were the first. I flew in a military helicopter to open the NYMEX floor 2 days after 9/11 because the U.S. government determined that price discovery, the stock exchange, the commodity exchange, was so crucial to the U.S. economy that we had to be open immediately. Wow. So we flew a skeleton crew of traders, on a military helicopter, on September 13th, 2001, to reopen that NYMEX floor. And when in those situations, you want that system to work. Think about if you were on a plane, and the pilot came out and said, "Great news, everyone! We have a brand new engine design. And it's the best ever. Like, it's proven mathematically to be superior in every way, shape, or form, and we're testing it the first time today. You guys are the inaugural flight." So raise your hand if you love technology, but you might also be like, maybe I'll let that next. I'll be second or third, right? And so I remember. I'll move on this, but I remember when I was testing the handheld trading app. So the first step was get rid of those pick cards. So I bought a bunch of these old, early stage personal devices. They were called compact iPacs. They were like big and heavy. And I hired a developer, and we coded a C# application to replace the pick card. And I went on the floor and I was testing to see if I could go as fast as the traders. And this old grizzled trader pulled me aside and he said, this is never going to work. And I was like, you're just old. And he said something I've remembered for 25 years. He said, kid, he goes, there's a reason the design of the spoon hasn't changed since the day of the caveman. It works. He's not wrong. Like that's not wrong, right? Now, eventually we did go electronic, and it blew the market up 10x. But I think it's important to understand that not every reticence towards technological adoption or change is based on being a Luddite or being dumb. There's valid reasons for believing in legacy systems.
So now that you've told us about your first transformation, so what got you interested in crypto?
But I'll tell one more story about the first transformation, proof how hard it is. That same day that I was testing my compact iPac, because it was heavy, it had a hole at the top for a lanyard, so you could just hang it around your neck. And I think you've heard this story before. And I didn't have a lanyard on it because I was just testing it. And one of the traders came up to me and he said, "What's that?" And I had been told, "Don't tell them what you're doing because they're going to be really upset about it." And I said, "I'm just testing some new tech from the CTO. It's no big deal." And he said, no, what's that? And he pointed to the hole where the lanyard would go. And I was like, I was confused. I was like, it's a hole. He goes, no, that's a camera. You're going to film us. You're filming us. And I was like, it's a hole. And I turned around, and he punched me in the back of the head and knocked me out on the floor of the NYMEX. And we used that assault as a way to get cameras put on the floor for the first time. So ironically, his fear of the camera resulted in cameras being there. So, okay. So change is hard. So crypto. Okay, so crypto. I've always been kind of, commodity derivatives is kind of esoteric and weird and wacky. Like I said, I believe whoever dies with the best stories wins. So I've always been kind of interested in esoteric, weird, and wacky stuff. Like Christina, I have an affiliation with MIT, not as profound as hers. But the dean of MIT was my professor from Harvard Business School, and I'd written some stuff for him he liked, so when he became dean of MIT, or a dean at MIT, I was teaching as an adjunct, and got to know the people there, and this is probably 10, 15 years ago, and there was this thing that happened early in crypto called the DAO hack, which was a kind of seminal moment in crypto, which kind of gave birth to a fork of Ethereum. And so modern Ethereum is from this hack. And it was basically an attempt to create a decentralized autonomous organization, an early attempt. And it was a really cool idea, maybe a little bit too soon, and there was too much value placed in that organization, and it was hacked. And it was a big deal back then. It still is, but big deal back then. People were kind of using it as maybe this means that this whole blockchain experiment is silly. And I started looking at it. And I approached it from a perspective of governance rules. So the thing I learned about the NYMEX that always fascinated me is humans' abilities to subvert any hard-coded rule set. So I'll give you an example. Those cameras that got put in, because I got assaulted on the floor of the NYMEX, that put in on a Friday. That Monday I show up, it's about 9:15 a.m., markets open, commodity markets open at 9:30. And we get a call from a guy called the floor general, whose job it was to maintain the physical integrity of the floor. And he calls, we have a problem, come down right now. And rush downstairs with the president of the exchange, and there are these pieces of tape, like heavy tape, around the floor of the exchange. And everyone's just staring at them, like, what the hell is that? I did a lot of theater in college. I was like, I know what these are. These are sight lines. When you're acting, you put them on the stage so you know where to walk to and stop. Uh-huh. Go up to the security room, and I'm gonna stand on this piece of tape, and I guarantee you I'm gonna know what's gonna happen. These guys had figured out the sight lines of all the cameras over the weekend and had marked the spots where they would not be videotaped so they could rob from their customers. So my point is, if you study prisons, for example, I'm fascinated by prisons, it doesn't matter how good your prison design is. The prisoners would figure out ways to subvert that rule set. So my interest in the DAO hack wasn't the technology failed, it was the governance rule set failed. And so I started writing blog posts about it, and a professor at MIT, David Schreier, got interested in it, and then we did a paper together on why it failed, why it was destined to fail, but how it wasn't necessarily a technology issue, core technology issue. And that paper kind of made the rounds, and I got a phone call from a pretty prestigious crypto VC firm that said, hey, would you want to join our board of directors? And so I did. In the paper, I called myself a cynical enthusiast. And I remember the guy called me, he's like, I like that because I don't like cynics and I have too many enthusiasts. I need somebody like normal. And so I got to learn, really dig in and learn about crypto from that organization. And then that led to the position at Coinbase.
Oh, wow, cool. Well, very interesting story. So, and thank you for sharing all of those points on transformation, because I think that when you look back, it always looks pretty seamless that these companies just pop up, they take the lead and perform. So, so I just let these folks come in. So it is a very, so from the outside, it always looks like there's some companies that just sort of slide right in and the adoption is seamless, because when you look backwards, everything always looks so easy. Yeah. But in fact, I mean, you and I have been on this journey for a long time. We've been on panels debating ideas.
We met because we were arguing.
I know we were arguing. I can't remember what we argued about, but I was passionately arguing about something. Yeah. And so, so it's been a long journey, and the adoption hasn't always been that smooth. I mean, now looking back, it doesn't look as bumpy. I mean, I look at the ICO phase as being this hyper-innovation phase, and some people look at it as the, a lot of theft and crime and criminals. But if you look at all the people jumping from project to project, testing new business models, new technologies, and there was a hyper-innovation. A lot of those ideas ended up like roadkill, but then other companies adopted them, like JP Morgan, who has a very successful network that sort of bypasses SWIFT. And so one of the things that we wanted to talk about today was, so what does it take for an organization to sort of compete with their existing infrastructure to build something new. Like, for example, when you were doing this NYMEX thing, right?
Yep.
I mean, you basically killed one thing to launch another
Yep.
thing, but very few firms do that. I mean,
Right.
Swift, I remember Swift had a press release that they had done, I believe that they launched their first blockchain transaction, as 2017, I think it was, and then nothing, right? So, so why is it that it's so difficult for companies to be able to launch these new technologies and new ideas when they already have all the customers?
So the reason NYMEX, the sole reason NYMEX was able to disintermediate itself and time it right to, they were probably 10 years too late, or 10 years later than they should have been, but they weren't too late. And it really came down to a visionary individual. Like they were lucky to have a chairman. All right, so aging's hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard, and like I fight every day. I find myself. I have children now. I find myself becoming the people that I used to rebel against, and you will too. Despite thinking it will happen, and you have to fight it with every core of your being. And to find a senior executive, like a really senior executive, who has the combination of age, wisdom, experience, but who has not hardened themselves to innovation, either because of fear, concerns about being irrelevant, all the reasons we become hardened to change, is rare. NYMEX had one, a guy called Vinny Viola, who just even now continues to be an innovator and founded EWT, which became Virtu, one of the largest electronic market makers. I hate to oversimplify it, but I generally think it's just companies that are lucky enough to have leaders who don't age poorly and don't harden themselves against innovation, and remember that they were the ones who were the rebels and the vanguard at some point in the past. And that's the rare commodity, is that leadership. So you either have a young, brash leader who he or she wants to break the rules, and they're either, most of them, quite frankly, are wrong, and most of them fail, but then a few of them become icons, or you once in a while have this diamond in the rough who have this leader who ages into innovation and continues to have that spark. And I think that's the difference. So those rare organizations, if you just look back, they always have an iconic individual who was able to maintain their curiosity into their executive senior years.
So as a hint to the class, when you're looking for your job, look for those type of leaders as someone to go work for, because they're the ones who are going to be building out the future.
Yeah.
So pivoting a little bit towards what Coinbase does, if you could share a little bit about Coinbase and its journey and what it does. And now looking back, it looks like it was a very unbumpy, very successful rise to the stars.
Super clean. No issues.
No regulatory issues. No
lawsuits that are going to drop later. So I'll just speak about, like I say, I do believe that companies are leader driven. So in a way, like our leader, Brian Armstrong, I view him as the reason I wanted to join, the reason I was so impressed by him, is he was almost the reverse, meaning he was this young, brash guy who started this company at a time when it was just a wild west, when everyone was just doing whatever they wanted and breaking rules. And he, in a way, exactly the reverse of what I said, he kind of like realized, okay, I need to act amongst, when everyone else is doing Wild West, I need to act like the conservative, older, and I'm going to be the first one to go public, and I'm going to follow all the rules. And that was the key. That was the rebel notion 10 years ago. It's completely reversed. And so I absolutely agree with Christina. I say the two things you should think about when looking for a job is, one, your leadership. Two is talk to people 2 or 3 levels above you in that organization, and ask yourself honestly, ask them, what is your job? And ask yourself honestly, will I be okay with this job? I always used to take jobs thinking, find out what the worst part of that job is, and make sure, would I be okay doing that with 50 to 75% of my time? Because that's, every job has grunt work. And so if you're okay with that part, because the other 25% makes you happy enough to deal with the grunt work, then you'll be okay with pursuing and working towards a career in that job. So I think Coinbase, the thing that differentiated them in the beginning was a commitment to public transparency through going early on the IPO, and everyone else thought that was nuts. A commitment to following a regulatory path. That was, I think, optimistic in the beginning, because in the beginning we had a regulatory regime, and this was super early. They didn't really know what to do about crypto, but they weren't openly hostile to it. We ran kind of midway through the path of Coinbase into a very challenging, difficult regulatory regime. And again, at that time, the answer could have been, all right, we're just going to pick up and go offshore. But that commitment to working with those regulators and fighting with those regulators in the courts, that was not an obvious choice 5-6 years ago. That was, especially because some of our competitors were not going that direction, and they seemed to be just growing like a weed, and it seemed to be a more obvious thing to go away from where the fight is. Yeah. So I don't know. I was lucky enough to join. I joined kind of right when things started getting bad from a regulatory perspective. I might have been the person 5-7 years ago to say, you know what, this is dumb. Let's just go offshore. Why we? They don't want us here. So I might have given bad advice. But in retrospect, the right thing to do was certainly to commit and say, we believe this asset class is transformational. We believe the technology is transformational, and we believe it's not going to exist in. I always used to think about NYMEX that there's a lit and a dark market for everything. The lit market is the regulated market that the regulated entities exist in. You would not be crazy to think 10-15 years ago maybe crypto will always stay in the dark market. Not dark meaning illegal, but just just not the non-regulated, non-institutional world. Maybe we'll just always stay in that like the wine market for individuals buying from individuals as opposed to highly regulated institutional. 10-15 years ago, you would not have been crazy to have that view that maybe it just always exists in this other way. And so, to Brian's credit and to the executive team's credit, they're like, no, we think this is going to bleed over into the lit and the dark market, and this is going to be transformational, and this is going to represent not a fraction of GDP. This is going to represent, high percentage points GDP, and therefore we're going to get a head start on being the regulated, credible, visible entity, and that was really tough, and it got much tougher.
So just to give them a little bit of an appreciation for the regulatory climate, because I know that I co-founded a couple of companies, and we went offshore and met with we'd meet with a regulator, and they'd be like, oh, this is so great, and then of course you would, set up your company, be ready to go, and then be like, you couldn't even get a bank account because the regulators really weren't that okay with it. And so then you'd move to another jurisdiction. So just to give them a little bit of a sort of idea of when you talk about, regulatory barriers, I mean, what was the climate like in those early days, and how clear was the regulatory path? So
I want to be really thoughtful here, because I don't believe in spiking the football. And we've shifted so far, the pendulum's so far in that direction. And I had I had and continue to have a very good positive working relationship with the SEC and CFTC. Prior to the administration that was very hostile to crypto, I was one of 9 people invited down to speak at their FinTech forum in 2018, 19. I still have very good friends who work there. Let me start with what I don't think. I do not think that the SEC throughout the organization is hostile to innovation. I do not think that they're dumb. I do not think that they're targeting specific industries to harm them. I think for the most part, the rank and file of the SEC are thoughtful, intelligent people who want to do the right thing, and they believe that by following and enforcing the rules that are part of what make the U.S. the most liquid capital market in the world, they're doing what's right for the country. I genuinely believe that. That being said, something happened, and maybe above my pay grade, it seems to be politically oriented, where the leadership of that administration made a determination that crypto was not a good thing for the economy and country. And because of that, I think it's fair to say, I'm trying to be very, very fair about this, there's a lot of evidence that leadership used every mechanism available, and as well as some mechanisms that really were not correct and not available, to dissuade the industry from growing and existing, and to dissuade customers who were interested in participating in this ecosystem. I think that's very, very fair. So I'm on the board of an organization called AIMA, which is a very large nonprofit that every single hedge fund in the world is a member of. And have you heard of the debanking discussion? Has anyone not heard of that discussion? Has anyone?
Could you
raise your hand if you don't know what debanking is? Okay, great. That's what I'm about. So 10 to 12 years ago, during the Obama administration, and this is all provably true, there was something called Operation Choke Point. where certain elements of the administration, particularly ones who are in the regulatory agencies that oversee banking, said we don't like certain industries. I think it was like guns, payday lenders. Like there was a list. So we don't like these industries, and however, Congress has not passed laws outlawing these industries. And so they began to try to exert pressure to cut off the lifeblood of every company, which is banking, to not work with those industries. So there was literally a whisper campaign. Phone calls were made saying to banks saying, hey, we don't think you should work with them. And if you work with them, it's going to make it harder for you. And we're going to be more stringent in our reviews of you. And so, it wasn't official policy. So these businesses started having trouble getting banking services, and they started complaining, and nobody believed them. It's a conspiracy theory. And then there was a bunch of hearings, and people got fired, and it's now well known that happened. And fast forward, 10 to 12 years later, about a year and a half ago, we started hearing the same thing happening in crypto. We started hearing, again, just people, hey, we're having trouble getting bank accounts, and not like complicated stuff, like a checking account. Like I've got $10 million, I want to pay my salary, I just have to open up like a corporate checking account, and I can't get anyone to do this. This is weird. And it kind of grew and grew and grew. I had AMA do an independent study, and we found that it was 6 times more likely that crypto businesses were denied basic banking services than non-crypto businesses. So we had this anecdotal evidence, we had data, and then Mark Andreessen went on Joe Rogan and kind of said, this is happening to my portfolio companies at Andreessen Horowitz, and it became a huge thing, and we had a change in administration, and now we have this thing, it's very well known, Operation Choke Point 2.0 occurred, and there's hearings now, and there's whistleblowers, and so we know that this happened, and we'll see what the results of that are, but that was an extrajudicial. That was not the proper way to kill industry, is to have Congress create laws to kill industry. That was an extrajudicial attempt to kill an industry that administration had determined was not in the best interest of the economy. So that's a tough thing to fight against. It's a really, really tough thing to fight against, because you can't even go to the courts and to get relief, because it's not official. It's just a whisper phone call. So that is the thing that happened. It's incredible that crypto, while this was happening, by the way, BlackRock launches the Bitcoin ETF, and it's the single most successful launch ever for an ETF. While this is all happening. So it's kind of testament to how popular this ecosystem and this asset class is, particularly amongst younger people.
And so, in terms of the kind of adoption process of, because I experienced we had a company that was in the insurance space, and because of the fact that we were insuring companies in the blockchain space, we couldn't get insurance because we were associated with that. And we tried UK and Switzerland and Gibraltar, and they'd be like, sure, come. And then they'd be like, oh, no, wait a second, you can't have a bank account. So I do remember that. So then going forward, so the regulators play a big role in the adoption, and it wasn't very clear what the rules were. So people were sort of trying to figure that out. There were some other financial rules that have been applied, that like the Howey rule. You want to talk a little bit about that? How that?
I'm not a lawyer, but in general, the one way to kind of stifle this innovation is to say, okay, we're going to apply the most stringent regulatory rule set possible, which we have, like the securities laws, on this asset class, and we're not going to acknowledge how it's different. And I think even people in crypto acknowledge that there are certain crypto assets that are probably securities, but there are certain ones that are not. And the courts have now determined conclusively that there are certain assets that can start as a security, like Ethereum, but then they can morph into something else over time because of the way they're utilized and the decentralization. So that those two latter concepts, one is not every single crypto asset is by definition a security, and this notion that they can start as one thing and turn into another. That was just summarily denied by the prior administration, despite the courts agreeing. And by the way, it's not some courts disagreed, some courts agreed, but it was clear that this was a new thing that we had to kind of sit down together and say, we don't really have a way, these laws that are 75, 125 years old probably can't envision an asset that is immutable, crypto native, programmable. Like this is a different creature. Mm-hmm. And it was tough. It was really, really tough because I'm trying to put myself in their position. They've got this wonderful series of rules from 1933 that have resulted in us having the most trusted capital market in the world. So I can understand if it ain't, it just works. You know, the spoon still works. Like I'm trying to put myself in their position of protecting the integrity of that system. And I'm sure over the last 100 years, a lot of people have come to the SEC and said, this is different, this is different, this is different. And most of it wasn't. So I try to remind myself that their job is to be skeptical. Mm-hmm. Because you can't create a new rule set for every single new innovation. I get that. True. But this is different because we've never had adoption at this rate. This is different the way cell phones were different. This is different the way Napster was different. File sharing was different. We have to rethink there's a difference between, I used to, when I was a kid, I used to use my tape deck, two boom boxes together to record a tape, to make a mixtape for my girlfriend in 7th grade. There is a difference. So technically I was just copying, I was just breaking copyright law. There is a difference between the effort you need to do that and being able to make replicate a file 1 million times via download, right? So we had to create different rules around that. So it's our challenge as an industry to overcome that cynicism and say, unlike the 100 other people that have come to you saying this is different, this is actually different. Mm-hmm. And it should be hard, by the way, it should be hard. Because we're talking about replacing the engine on the plane. Yeah. You shouldn't just be able to walk in and say, I've got a better design, plug it into every airplane. But at the same time, you have to be dealing with a rational counterparty who's not emotionally trying to not acknowledge that once in a while something is different. And we just weren't for 4 to 6 years. That's the problem. Like I understood the NYMEX guys' reticence to change. Mm-hmm. I understood it because their whole life was that floor. But what I wouldn't understand is, say, like if a new CEO came into NYMEX, who was like, I'm going to maintain, even against interest of the shareholders, I'm going to maintain this because I hate change. I don't like change. That's what. Okay, so it's hard when you don't understand the reason for the reticence. Yeah. Like Gary Gensler taught crypto at MIT. We know what he thought because we have video from the classes at MIT. So we know what he thought was not what he was saying. We know he stood up in class and said, these things probably mostly aren't securities. And then we know a year later he said, these things are all securities without exception. And so then you have to ask yourself, well, what obviously you didn't change. Sorry, guys. Obviously you didn't change your beliefs in the course of 1 year. What is it that's causing this view? And it's politics, and that's difficult to overcome.
So, which leads to another question, because you always hear these people like, I think Christine Lagarde is a great leader, but she often will talk about how terrible crypto is and all the crime and whatever. Yeah. We've done exercises in class where we've looked at the sort of mathematical immutability and played around with changing some blocks and just sort of demonstrate why this mathematical immutability is so special, right? Yeah. And I know that you have very close relationships with Elliptic and Chainalysis and the FBI and a lot of these parties that are involved in both the transparency and making sure that there's an understanding of not using the funds for bad things. But one of the other things we talked about is that as opposed to another bank, let's say, that doesn't use crypto, there's a lot of visibility with respect to a transaction that comes from that recent hack. Mm-hmm. So you have to really be on top of things in order to make sure that you are following KYC, all these regulations with respect to know your customer, travel rule, mm-hmm. et cetera. Mm-hmm. So could you talk a little bit about, a little bit about the difference between, the crypto markets from the visibility perspective versus a traditional market, and how much work goes into maintaining that, top rating as a crypto institution to make sure that you're not accepting, criminal money, et cetera. I mean, that you put a lot of infrastructure in place in order to be able to manage that because the visibility is 100%.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, look, so first let's start with the acknowledgement that, of course, bad actors use digital assets to do things, just like bad actors use every asset to do
Yeah.
things. And there's disparate reports that have been filed and analysis, and the transparency of blockchain makes it a little easier to believe that it's not any higher as a percentage basis than it is for cash or jewels or other things. Who knows this? So in countries that have massive money laundering problems, who knows? What's the first thing that governments do vis-a-vis physical cash? They did this in Colombia during the Pablo Escobar days. What's the first thing that you think a country's government does when they want to combat money laundering relative to the physical cash? I'll give you a hint. They kill something. They kill the highest denomination note.
Demonetize it.
Why do you think they kill the highest denomination physical note? Anyone have a sense for why they would do that?
Tax, fraud money and everything.
It's even simpler than that.
Makes
But
it
that's not
harder
fair.
to transport.
Exactly. It's physically heavy.
Yeah.
Pablo Escobar was 20 years ago. They're still uncovering in fincas on the outskirts of Colombia, these small farms, they're still digging up oil barrels of physical cash to this day. Because Pablo Escobar's regime was making $1 billion a month. $1 billion a month, if you take the 100 lira, what's Colombia? Peso. The 100 peso note or 500 peso note, and you kill it, and you go from 500 to 50. That's a 10x increase in the physical space of cash, right? So that is untrackable, completely untrackable. So we've always had this problem, and crypto, any store of value, whatever, will have this problem. But you've got a step up in that it's completely transparent, at least to the wallet level. The FBI would love it if bad actors use public blockchains. They would love that. It doesn't guarantee they'll be caught, but if they do get caught, it improves the evidentiary chain of analysis to convict them. So crypto's not a solution to crime by any question. We'll still have the same issues. Ultimately, you have a wallet address, and then you have a beneficial owner of that wallet, and if they use a series of shell corporations all around the country, you have that same AML issue. There is a theory that over time, and this probably won't happen in the short term, because I don't think governments are going to change dramatically their AML KYC laws, but our mutual friend Chris Giancarlo has written, he was a former CFTC commissioner, and he's written a couple of interesting theses around how AML might change over time. As we move to, as all of our value becomes digitally native, it makes sense that our process of determining fraud will also be equally digitally native. So what does that mean? He uses a toll booth analogy of getting on a highway. He says right now, you go to a toll and you pay your toll and you enter the highway. You don't sign a bunch of paperwork that says, I promise not to speed. Mm-hmm. You don't sign it, you pay your toll and you go in, and then we monitor you. The police maybe use radar, maybe use helicopters, and they find the rule breakers. We have an AML policy that is like a toll booth that every single car has to stop for an hour and commit in writing to not speeding, and then we don't monitor them once they're actually on the highway. We just let them do whatever the hell they want, but you know what? We have the paperwork. Yeah. And but there's a 20-car pileup and 19 kids died. Yeah, but we could check the box. So and it's kind of true. I mean, you have to go through hoops to open up an account. But then you kind of can, maybe they'll catch you, maybe they won't. But the emphasis is on the pre-boarding as opposed to actively monitoring. Now, some people might say from a privacy perspective, that's a good thing. It's a debate. But the notion is, especially with artificial intelligence and immutable public blockchains, we now might have the ability to actually lessen the burden up front, but pay more attention to the activities themselves. Now, for those of you who've ever traveled and tried to use your American Express card in a new country and get a phone call saying, hey, what's going on, that there'll be speed bumps, and not everyone's gonna get it right. But look, I know when I get that call, I'm happy. It means Amex is looking out for my interests. But so these run into issues of privacy and whatnot. But this notion that we have an AML KYC system that is predicated on an analog, archaic system, like a paper-based system, where now we have the ability to digitally monitor not just independent transactions, but to use artificial intelligence to discern intent from those transactions. Why not start moving in that direction? With, again, the understanding that might have privacy considerations. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
We appreciate your taking the time, and thank you.